The Afterdeath Journal of an American Philosopher, The Worldview of William James, by Jane Roberts, Chapter 12, A Master Language and a School for Philosophers. Monday morning, May 16, 1977. There is constant telepathic contact between the living and the dead, though not in the gross terms sometimes imagined. That is, the thoughts and feelings of the dead are as active and vital as those of the living and contribute to the mental atmosphere, though at a different level, for those thoughts circulate in the way that higher air currents might, providing a more generalized stabilizing atmosphere. The ideas and methods of natural communication of the species depend not only upon built-in biological inclinations and abilities, but also upon the continuing knowledge of each individual who upon death contributes his experience to the species as a whole, or rather makes it available in a new way. Learning in life takes place during the sleep state, even as in the waking one, and in dreams, people venture into that more generalized atmosphere, bringing with them the day's problems and information, weighing these against a heritage of experience that belongs to the entire species, and to which the dead have contributed. Learning throughout the ages is passed down in such a fashion, implementing the more pragmatic waking methods of trial and error. To this extent, the emphasis upon ancestral worship in some cultures has a valid basis. Nor does learning stop at death, but takes place in this different context. It is known, of course, that some cultures pass information orally down the generations through song and myth. Information is also transmitted through this inner mental environment to which living and dead both contribute, and which can be compared to a field of viable information everywhere invisibly surrounding life. The thoughts of the living and the dead mix, as they say, the air of deserts and seashores, eventually merge one with the other, and contribute to the world climate, even though locally each has its own characteristics that are seemingly opposite. So I am not speaking of psychic invasion, but stating that men's thoughts and feelings, both from the living and the dead, form a mental field of information and interaction. The species is not wholly dependent upon physical methods of learning alone, but is ever propelled also by inner incentives and provided with additional data. And so knowledge is transmitted from generation to generation through dreams and inner communications. These acquaint whole peoples with their own cultural heritage, and greatly enhance the worth of language, which itself acts as a structure to communicate certain symbols while blocking out others. Different languages, of course, represent various characteristics of feeling, thought, and belief. And they dignify some of these through expression and emphasis, while ignoring others as verbal frameworks. Languages are verbal frames, as well as, say, verbal paintings, giving expression to certain images and sensations, and emphasizing these through the framework of verbal structure, which expresses and restricts at the same time. Basically, the thoughts of the dead need follow no such patterns, and the information received from this generalized mental field of information is given in a kind of master language, which each person translates into his own idiom. Such translations are automatic in the same way that photosynthesis is an automatic process on the part of the plants, so that any communication in whatever language is already an automatic translation of inner information, as water poured into a glass takes the shape of its container. These are not distortions, but various expressions of inner realities, the languages being psychic containers that serve to display information so that it can be poured in quotes, from one container to another most efficiently. In basic terms, however, languages are born in each moment, and this atmospheric presence of which I've spoken seems to be characterized by a knowledge in which all languages are understood. That is, no matter what language you use to address a question, the answer is given in the same idiom. And with my mental conversations with others here, the same applies. Here, then, the atmosphere itself seems to translate my words from my language to the language of the hearer. This happens automatically as far as I can tell. The translation is mental, instant, and complete. No misunderstandings occur in that regard. The usual barriers of language are non-existent, while I am equally sure that a master language is utilized that remains invisible, since the translations are so instantaneous. Information is specific and makes sense only in the midst of a system of facts in which it fits. The emotions' wisdom cannot fit into a system of mathematics, for example, and, as mentioned earlier, information can provide knowledge and can, under certain conditions, actually detract from it. All of man's intuitive knowledge, his Bibles and other sacred books, consist of knowledge automatically translated into the specifics of one language, which is then translated by man into many others. The knowledge flows into that verbal or written container, being displayed according to the images, traditions, mental and cultural shapes characteristic of a given language. The knowledge thus becomes specific, but specific in a necessarily prejudiced fashion. The symbols of a language float atop it, like multicolored and multi-shaped fishes, so that it is also necessary to look between the vowels and syllables to the transparent waters beneath, upon which the fishes ride. Man's versions of God, or the gods, of life after death, of the beginning and the ending of the world, are therefore translations, as of course this manuscript must be, and translations that fit the experienced reality to some degree while still leading beyond it. Any person knows that private speech only approximates feeling or sensation, and only a fool mistakes his expression of a feeling for the feeling itself. There is also then the same kind of gap, inexpressible, between my experience out of time and my attempts to explain it. Myths are more truthful than facts in that regard, but only if you do not take them literally. My nature is not a myth-making one. However, I seek for connectives that are imaginative and yet tuned to the facts of your experience. In those terms, it is true to say that here I speak to others who are more or less at the same level of reality or understanding as myself. These levels of understanding then form their own environments, providing certain dynamics that structure experience. Instead of continents and other land formations that structure life on Earth, Here, mental states provide the criteria for various kinds of perception, which frame experience in the same way that language structures thought in physical terms. I am now used to communicating with persons who may be nowhere visible to me. For example, the criteria for communication depending more upon the complementary relationships of mental states than upon physical availability. Other environments and circumstances are related to me, in such cases through mental images transmitted automatically. These are available, however, only to those like myself who exist at the same frequency or who are tuned into certain frequencies of this vast field of viable information. My experience is related in the same way to those at my level, and we pool our knowledge, breaking it down to information of a more specific personal nature for ourselves, while our personal experience forms part of the generalized field that is perceptually available. Some of us are visible in those terms to others, but our larger communications are not confined to that degree. There are those more characterized by visual expression or by sound who, instead of verbal or mental language, communicate through a cross-sense language of rich complexity. In a way, your entire perceptual range is a kind of language through which physical reality is spoken, a language acquired so early in life and so effortlessly that it becomes automatic. It is acquired, however, with all the nuances, inflections, and assumptions of any language. Only this one possesses biological verbs and mental nouns, and it organizes the entire perceptual range. Monday afternoon, May 16th, 1977. Since I too once spoke this language, though in those terms I am now bilingual, I can compare my experience now and then. Obviously, I can still organize my thoughts in the old familiar fashion, as I am doing now, but ultimately I find this so limiting as to be impractical, except for this kind of manuscript production. An intelligent traveler will try to learn the language native to a country he intends to visit in order to understand and to be understood by others, and quite practically to make his needs and wishes known. If and when you travel to other planets beyond your solar system, you will instantly realize what I have just said is true. Your physical body and its entire perceptual range is itself a language spoken automatically. Not only would a difference in conventional language separate you from any hypothetical natives on other planets, but so would the language of your biology. The utterances of molecules into cells, genetic passages, or sentences constructed in entirely different biological patterns. Some visitors to Earth have learned to change their language in this more comprehensive manner, appearing as much like men as possible in order to examine and understand the physical world. Bodily structure and form is a language also. Then, and many in my environment, can change that structure, taking different forms that express their mood or experience, as you might say. Sing a song, write a symphony, or whatever. I am not nearly that proficient, and as of now my direct experience is with those whose existences rather parallel my own, either through complementary interest or historical connotation. I am still philosophically minded, and so I am in direct contact with many philosophers, both famous and unfamous, most from historical periods other than my own, and many natives of other cultures and civilizations that were unknown to me with my stance in the Western world. In our dialogues, I am astounded by stories of other civilizations upon Earth's planet, worlds once practical and real, now lost to the world's history, yet very much alive, for like fossils, their beliefs give new fuel for succeeding systems of thought and schools of knowledge. Their forgotten languages exist in the pauses between words and help compose the rhythms of living languages, even as their philosophies provide inner rhythms upon which more current theories ride so securely. Now I smile, thinking how often in life I spoke of the ancient Greeks or Mesopotamians, for from my present standpoint, their cultures exist almost simultaneously with your own. The Victorian age is but a whisper echoing through the corridors of sound in which the loftiest of civilizations represent only one note, but a note of infinite variations, echoing and re-echoing, only each time with the most significant meaningful change in rhythm or cadence. So these philosophers have already taught me more than I could possibly learn in one or a series of lifetimes. For here is a concentrated type of learning experience of a kind I cannot explain, though I will try. There were far more civilizations on the earth than scientists suppose, and the earth is far older than your records show, or the evidence will support. Some cultures were so different from those that I was familiar with that my questions themselves made little sense, even granting the inner telepathic understanding that unites us. Tuesday morning, May 17, 1977. I asked one philosopher, for example, can you explain the social structure that existed in your civilization? And I meet a mental puzzled silence. The philosopher smiles, wanting to please me with a reply, yet amused by the definite block in his own understanding of my question. I try again. The words social and your are the culprits. Mentally, he sends me images of a world in which there is no word for your, but only ours, and in which the concept of social has 1,000 different connotations, a world in which men and animals alike are considered social creatures, intermixing many levels, as if, say, Western civilization's beavers were given equal consideration with human bridge builders, and both worked together, their lodgings respected and their needs met. Mentally, I transmit pictures of the world I knew, with society referring to human activities only, and the philosopher shakes his head disbelievingly, ready to dismiss what I am saying as a philosopher's joke. Not, after all, in the best of taste. I persist. When did your civilization begin and end? He looks at the other philosophers questioningly. Am I serious? In their midst, I see a Western world philosopher of, I think, the 16th century. But he too only smiles at me as if he has been through, as if he had just been through the same experience as this himself, and I must be on my own. The answer I think I receive is, the civilization reaches beforehand and afterward equally. The answer I think I receive is, the civilization reaches beforehand and afterward equally. I say, but when did it flower? When did its arts and sciences flourish? Now, is the amused answer. Again, I persist. But in historic terms, the civilization vanished a million years ago, if I understand you correctly. And before my eyes is suddenly spread a living world of obvious industry and achievement, buildings, cities, people walking down the streets, a profusion of animals intermingling. I was used to sharing the avenue with horses, and as I think of that, the philosopher nods. Quote, an acceleration and continuation of that kind of concourse between man and animals, but on a more equal footing, end quote. Somewhere he means to make a joking but fond comment I do not quite understand, using the Latin word for horse and a play upon the English word for equal. I cannot quite follow the interplay. He shows me brilliant pictures of bees swarming around flowers, insects flying from plant to plant. Then, immediately afterwards, growing out of that image, I see a spaceship, dipping in deep space from planet to planet. One and the same principle we learn from the animals, the plants, the insects. I begin to protest, he says. As bees leave one flower for another, we left one planet for another. But I'm speaking about the Earth's historic past, I say. Even from my understanding of Earth's science since my death, the evidence for the planet's past wouldn't include the amount of time that you seem to be implying. Earth isn't that old. But even as I communicate this thought to him, I know that despite all evidence to the contrary, Earth is that old. But it's impossible, I say, and the philosophers laugh together and agree with me. As I stare from face to face, they say almost in unison, but quite true. A slap in the face to logic, I think, a logic which presently has my own face stamped upon it. I grow stubborn, and for a moment I feel an odd role reversal, remembering rebellious students who stood up protesting in audiences now and then when I tried to explain a given issue. Now I feel like one of those students, and uncomfortable in the process. Before my eyes flash again images of more civilizations than I can count, each flourishing, using what seems to be the same planet in different fashions, each with different relationships between man and other species, each reflecting these characteristics through their own languages, and, oddest of all, interpreting man's state of being in completely different terms. I almost glimpse millions of shining points that seem to connect those worlds, holding each intact, yet providing an unseen but sensed tension in which each world is related to the other, perhaps like a multi-dimensional cobweb. But again, I cannot follow. How could any one science or civilization understand all of that? Asks the philosopher, who also speaks for the others. He answers himself. Within physical life, you can examine only the data given to you, the rules of your own world, and make deductions based upon that information. This dialogue is and is not imaginative. That is, it is a reconstruction of an actual event, a learning process that I frequently encounter, but translated by me through my knowledge of Western customs to an imaginative edifice as faithful as possible to the actual events. At this place, in each dialogue, when, in one way or another, I am shown the vastness of reality, the following usually happens. I become rather angry. Feeling certainly like a junior member of the assemblage, accustomed as I have been to grant myself not inconsiderable powers of intellect and insight, I cannot pinpoint the psychological, emotional, and intellectual dilemma exactly, or the faculty of my mind that suddenly cracks open just when my own frustration fills me with an almost agonizing feeling of incompetence and ignorance. But suddenly, a corner of my mind does shudder, shake itself, and become transparent in essence, as if 1,000 veils that previously covered it had been dissolved. What happens then, I cannot describe, for I scarcely understand it myself. Perhaps a caterpillar turning into a butterfly feels the same way in its fashion. A transforming process starts, and through my mind's new, small, but cleared window, an immense, warm, but not blinding light shines. Whether or not this light has anything to do with light as it is understood earthwise, I do not know, but I experience it as a living, knowledgeable light that is part of the atmospheric presence mentioned earlier, and it imparts knowledge, or rather comprehension, through methods unknown to me. I receive comprehension, as they say. A flower receives light from the sun. I am immeasurably strengthened, supported, and my earlier feelings of frustration and groping vanish. Wednesday morning, May 18th, 1977. These dialogues and learning encounters always end in that fashion, and no matter how inconceivably multitudinous the visions of other worlds, with oftentimes a resulting diminution in my own sense of importance, which seems to dwindle alarmingly in contrast to the cosmic outspread before my mental eyes. Despite all this, that knowledgeable living light seems to arouse the smallest portions of my being and shine warmly through the ever-enlarging, transparent window that opens in my mind. After each such experience, I feel somewhat like a young psychological plant being tended carefully in the shade while being exposed gradually to the real daylight, while it had earlier supposed that the shade represented the entire light of the world. It is as though a curtain were drawn aside briefly, so that afterwards I do not feel dwarfed by the earlier visions given me, say by the philosophers. Irrational as they may sound, I sometimes wonder if those visions in some way represent psychic blueprints of a reality as distant from mine as a seed to the entire generations of its progeny. Is it possible, for example, that I am being shown pictures of my own complete stages? Of course, I hesitate to come to such conclusions, even tentatively. Yet I am also quite certain that there is a connection between myself as I am and the visions I am shown. It has occurred to me that perhaps my thoughts form such shapes and patterns on other levels than mine, that all of our thoughts actually fit together like massive eternal jigsaw puzzles, attaining another kind of being than ours, another type of awareness, that there are civilizations of thought people whose reality appears quite normal and natural to them, as earth life did to me and still does to you. In that case, I would be viewing thought universes in which my own thoughts participate, for surely I have no idea where thoughts go when I am finished with them. I perceive these as visions of populated societies and cultures of endless variety, intense sciences and arts, in my terms, from future and past alike, and from parallel times that seem to go off like shooting stars from any given moment. I know better in my position than to wonder if these are physical realities currently operative. The question seems to be, in what context are these operative worlds, and how are they connected with me? They may again represent mental configurations, representationally apparent for my edification. Sometimes I feel the way I imagine a single cell might if it were suddenly shown a vision of the entire body, of its complete form, as if an ovum could glimpse the giant-sized human form that would spring from its own natural growth. Am I then, in some as yet unknown way, being shown a pattern that represents my own future adult form, but on an entirely different scale, a mental equivalent for what on earth would be normal growth processes, but occurring in a mental, psychic, or spiritual medium? I thought that life on earth presented puzzlements, but the challenging concepts I glimpse are dizzying. For example, dimly now and then, when such visions are being shown, I sense an identification of myself or parts of myself with the spiraling images I see. When I try to pinpoint the identification, however, I still feel it, but without being able to locate it in myself. That is, association does not seem involved, yet there is a tantalizing sense of familiarity of the most intimate nature, coupled with an equally alien awe, for the configuration represents a majesty and complexity impossible to grasp fully. To make matters more complicated, I also feel that these visions, shown during the learning encounters, also represent valid civilizations known to various philosophers, so that the images seem to stand for some expansion of growth of thoughts into discrete realities. I mull these experiences over after our sessions end, and my thoughts finally grow hazy, like clouds drifting away from me, changing shapes as they vanish from sight. Clouds do change shape, of course, mix with the Earth's atmosphere, turn into makers of rain or snow, and, though their exterior appearance may be calm, winds of great intensity may be swirling inside, and though they may look solid enough from the ground, their shapes more or less vanish into mist, and their apparent solidity gives way. So it also occurs to me that as clouds combine into different patterns, different forms, and cause differing conditions, perhaps thoughts operate in the same way. Countless thoughts must have passed through my mind, yet I remember only the smallest percentage, and I identify, of course, with those that I keep as retainers about me, for they provide a sense of continuity. But after my learning encounters, I also sense other thoughts, equally mine, buzzing about me, grouped in various ways, but not in a time context. They all are equally present or equally non-present. They seem to form shapes, so that I wonder whether I am all unknowingly the psychological center of many worlds. The assembly of philosophers may each be going through similar experiences, but I suspect not. I think that they are the professors, so to speak. They are attentive, yet these questions are mine to answer, and the other philosophers simply provide the medium in which comprehension can occur. Although I seem to be the only one student present, I have frequently sensed that there are others also. Invisible to me as I am to them, it is as if we are each provided with separate psychological learning cubicles, perhaps to focus our attention. I have the idea that there are comparatively simple mental gestures that will let me see my learning comrades, ways of looking over or under the psychological walls dividing us. But so far, I have been too engrossed in my own experiences to try. It should also be understood that I am describing only my own experiences. In an earth environment, I suppose, this would be a school for philosophers. Others may care little for the type of challenges I am encountering, and weary quickly of contemplating the complications that arise from such philosophical engagements. There are those who delve into interrelationships instead, stressing the multitudinous emotional interactions possible, weaving these into various kinds of existence and forming multidimensional psychological connections with them. Such endeavors have their own flavor, but would find me an impatient student. So, of those schools, you must learn from others than myself. It may well be, also, that the different subject matter in schools of inquiry are merely various slants or focuses in which the same material is presented, couched in terms of the student's main interest, and so tailored to get his attention. I can imagine some kindly, crafty super psychologist fondling a sprightly beard and saying to his associates, "James, here, fancies himself a philosopher, so let's give him a taste of it, shall we?" If so, I may have bitten off more than I can chew. This concludes Chapter 12. Chapter 13 is entitled Biological Faith and Nature's Source. And I hope you enjoyed Chapter 12. I certainly did. My goodness. How broad a perspective it gives us of the afterlife. It's wonderful, isn't it? Yes. Well, if you have any thoughts on this, leave them in comments below. I'd love to hear them. Till soon.